Imagine a kitchen where the aroma of a hearty stew begins to waft through the air. Before you even see the dish, and certainly long before you taste it, something remarkable happens inside your body. Most likely, you start to salivate. Your gastric juices, deep within your stomach, might already be preparing for the feast ahead. This reaction seems so obvious to us today that we rarely give it a second thought, but for Ivan Pavlov, this was an obsessive mystery. To him, these internal processes were like a black box that no one had been able to unravel. At the beginning of the 20th century, the world of digestion was a complete enigma. We understood that we ate food and that, somehow, that food was transformed into energy and waste, but the mechanics were hidden from view. What exactly started these processes? What were the hidden signals that told the stomach, the pancreas, and the salivary glands that it was time to get to work? No one knew for sure, and the scientific community was left guessing about the hidden triggers of the human body. Into this world of mystery stepped Ivan Pavlov. He was a Russian physiologist with a mind that was as brilliant as it was methodical. He possessed a temperament that tolerated no mediocrity, viewing every biological process as a perfectly orchestrated symphony that had to be understood note by note. His particular orchestra for this study was dogs. However, these were not just any laboratory animals. Pavlov developed revolutionary surgical techniques for his animals that, for the time, were considered pure science fiction. He was not a man who was content with simply knowing that dogs digested their food. He wanted to see the process in action. He wanted to touch and measure pure digestive juices as they were produced. To achieve this, he created what he called fistulas. These were small surgical openings that allowed him to collect saliva or gastric juices directly from a gland. This was a groundbreaking approach because it allowed him to study these fluids without them ever mixing with food or other bodily fluids. You can think of it like installing a small faucet on an animal's body specifically to observe exactly what comes out and when. Thanks to these innovative techniques, Pavlov and his team began to understand the exact rhythm and composition of digestive juices. His team was as devoted as they were exhausted by the rigorous demands of the lab. They turned the laboratory into a temple of meticulous observation where every drop of fluid was accounted for. But in the midst of all this intense study of digestion, something peculiar and unexpected began to happen. Pavlov's dogs were highly accustomed to their daily routines. Over time, they began to salivate before any food even reached their mouths. This was not part of the plan. They would salivate just by seeing the assistant who usually brought the food, or even just by hearing the sound of that assistant's footsteps approaching the room. Sometimes, the dogs would begin to salivate at the mere sight of an empty dish. It was as if their bodies somehow knew what was coming next. Initially, Pavlov did not see this as a breakthrough. He called it psychic secretion, and at first, he considered it a major annoyance. To him, it was something that contaminated his pure measurements of digestion and interfered with the scientific integrity of his data. But as a truly great scientist, his curiosity eventually outweighed his frustration. He started to wonder if this annoyance was actually the key to something much larger. What if this was the way to understand how the brain and the mind influenced the body? He questioned how a simple external signal, like a footstep or an empty bowl, could trigger such a complex physiological response deep within the animal. This realization shifted his focus. A physiologist who was once obsessed only with gastric juices found himself, almost by accident, on the verge of one of the greatest discoveries in the history of psychology. He realized that this psychic secretion was not a mistake, or a flaw in his experiment. Instead, it was a window into the deepest mechanisms of our learning and behavior. This led him to redirect the entire course of his research to explore how these associations were formed and how the brain could be trained to respond to the environment. To understand the magnitude of this shift, we must first appreciate the incredible scientific foundation that Pavlov had already built. In 1904, he received the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. Interestingly, this prize was not for his famous work with the dogs and the bell. It was awarded in recognition of his work on the physiology of digestion. The committee noted that he had transformed and enlarged our knowledge of the subject. Before Pavlov, the digestive tract was seen as an inaccessible chemical reactor. Earlier experiments by other scientists were often crude and invasive, leading to contaminated results that no one could reproduce. They tried to study digestion by removing organs or collecting juices in very rudimentary ways, which caused suffering for the animals and resulted in confusing data. It was like trying to understand how a car engine works by hammering on the bodywork instead of opening the hood to observe the components in action. Pavlov changed all of that with his motto of rigorous observation and experimentation. His team perfected surgical techniques that allowed the animals to recover and live comfortably while the studies were conducted. One of his most famous surgical feats was the creation of the Pavlov pouch. This involved sectioning a small part of a dog's stomach while keeping its blood and nerve supply completely intact. He then sewed this small section to the outer surface of the abdomen. This created a miniature stomach that would produce gastric juices at the exact same time as the main stomach. Because it was separate from the food the dog was actually eating, Pavlov could collect and analyze the juices in their purest form. It was essentially like having a small digestive laboratory on the outside of the animal's body. He also devised ways to divert salivary or pancreatic ducts to the outside, allowing for the collection of these juices into special receptacles while the animal ate or simply looked at food. These feats of engineering and medicine allowed him to describe the perfectly coordinated symphony of glands and enzymes regulated by the nervous system. Through this work, Pavlov discovered the cephalic phase of digestion. This is the idea that the mere sight, smell, or even the thought of food sets the digestive gears in motion, preparing the body to receive nourishment. This was a massive step forward, but the psychic secretion he observed was an even larger piece of the puzzle. He decided to set aside his pure digestion research to focus on how the brain makes a salivary gland respond to something that is not food. This led to the creation of the famous experiment involving the dog, the bell, and salivation. The setup was simple but brilliant. A hungry dog was placed in a harness. First, Pavlov would ring a bell. At this stage, the bell was a neutral stimulus. It meant nothing to the dog, and the dog did not salivate. Then, he would present the food, such as meat powder. Naturally, the dog would salivate. This is what we call an unconditioned response to an unconditioned stimulus. The dog doesn't need to learn this, it is an innate biological reaction. The magic happened when Pavlov began to ring the bell just before presenting the food. He did this over and over again, bell, then food, then salivation. After a period of repetition, something extraordinary occurred. When the bell alone rang, even if there was no food anywhere in sight, the dog would begin to salivate. The bell had transformed from a neutral stimulus into a conditioned stimulus. The salivation in response to the bell became a conditioned response. The dog's brain had learned a new rule: the bell means food is coming, so it is time to get ready. This form of learning, which Pavlov called a conditioned reflex, proved that automatic physiological responses could be trained by experience. We can see this in our modern world as well. Think about when you hear the theme song of your favorite streaming series. Before any images even appear on the screen, you might feel a small tingle of excitement. The music is just a sound, but because it has been associated with the pleasure of watching your show, the music alone can evoke that feeling. Pavlov's work went far beyond the world of dogs and laboratory equipment. It opened a window into the very nature of human learning. His discoveries helped explain how our habits, our phobias, and even our preferences are formed. While he remained focused on the physiology of the brain, his legacy gave rise to behaviorism and psychology. This school of thought suggests that much of our behavior can be explained through these stimulus and response associations. Consider the common alarm clock. The sound of that alarm is a conditioned stimulus. It is associated with the act of waking up and the feelings of tiredness or irritation that often come with it. Over time, just hearing a similar sound in a different context can cause a surge of stress or the feeling of being startled, even if it is not actually time to wake up. We see this in our emotional lives too. The smell of a freshly baked cookie can act as a conditioned stimulus that instantly transports you back to your grandmother's kitchen. This can evoke powerful feelings of love and security, which is essentially an emotional conditioned reflex. The world of advertising also relies heavily on Pavlov's findings. Brands constantly associate their products with images of happiness, success, or beauty. They want us to see their logo as a conditioned stimulus so that when we look at the product, we automatically experience positive feelings and feel a desire to buy it. Even our deepest fears can be shaped this way. If a person has a traumatic experience in an enclosed space, that space can become a conditioned stimulus that triggers panic or anxiety even when the person is perfectly safe. Pavlov demonstrated that we are not just thinking beings, we are also beings who respond to our environment in predictable ways based on the associations we have formed throughout our lives. Ivan Pavlov was a scientist of a unique caliber. He achieved the highest scientific honor for his work on digestion, but he was brave enough to follow an anomaly into entirely new territory. His story is a powerful reminder that the greatest discoveries often come from paying attention to the things that don't fit our expectations. Psychic secretion was not a mistake to be discarded, it was a clue that led to a fundamental truth about life and knowledge. From the study of gastric juices to the complex architecture of the human mind, Pavlov showed us that we are all interconnected with our environment in ways we are still working to fully understand. Every time you feel a pang of hunger when you see a restaurant logo or feel a wave of nostalgia from an old song, you are experiencing a living echo of Pavlov's work. He was a true architect of our understanding of behavior, showing us that our past experiences are constantly shaping our physical and emotional responses to the world around us. His legacy remains a testament to the power of rigorous observation. He taught us that by looking closely at the small, repetitive details of life, we can uncover the massive, hidden gears that drive our behavior. Whether it is a dog in a harness or a human in a modern city, the rules of conditioning remain a fundamental part of the biological experience. If you enjoyed this journey into the secrets of the mind and the body, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the history of science and the discoveries that changed our world. For more information, visit minrora.com.